Nisesha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mamebiye pravadyante mayametam tarantite. Verily, this divine illusion of mine, this Maya, made up of the three gunas, is difficult to cross over. They alone cross over this illusion who take refuge in me. Good morning, everyone. We will be talking about Maya this morning and Mahamaya, the Divine Mother. And this question about what is the meaning of Maya has been coming up lately. Many people have been asking about it. So I thought I would talk about it. Don't expect me to be able to explain it. I can discuss the concept of Maya a little bit, but there's no way to explain this phenomenon that we call Maya. It's beyond our ability to explain it. I can try to go through some of the concepts, but even that will be very hazy because this is a very tricky subject. This whole concept of Maya is a very rich concept, and we use it in different contexts. Sometimes there's the cosmic context that this Maya is used to explain how Brahman can turn into somehow the creator of the universe, or manifest as the universe, or be transformed into the universe. And once that happens, enters into us, and then falls under the spell of Maya. That means under the spell of ignorance. And this same Maya becomes identified with the Divine Mother as the cosmic form, and we call her Mahamaya. So a very complex subject, and I'll try to go through, and if not, explain the concept, try to explain why it's a little bit unexplainable, because that's the very nature of the whole topic. It plays a critical role philosophically, because we'll see that the Vedantins, especially the Advaitans, have painted themselves into a corner. They've come up with the concept of Brahman, which doesn't allow any type of explanation for the universe. This infinite absolute reality that is just pure consciousness, that is inactive, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't have any desires, it doesn't care for anything, it's just this pure consciousness. We start with that, and we have to weave out of that some explanation for this universe that we see around us. Now, if we're sensible people, we'll understand very quickly that how can we possibly understand how and why and when and where from this universe comes? We have to admit that it's a big miracle, but as philosophical people, we think that somehow we can understand these things. So anyhow, this is what this idea of Maya is all about. And I want to start out with this philosophical side. There's Maya as some concept of cosmic ignorance or illusion, and somehow will become some type of power that belongs to Brahman. Let's start out with that. So there's a very nice verse. I'll start with this verse. Avidyaya avidyatvam idam eva tu lakshanam yat pramana sahishnutvam anyata vastu sa bhavet. A very interesting verse that gives us a definition of avidya and Maya are used synonymously. Avidya, ignorance, is another word for Maya, this cosmic ignorance. Sometimes avidya is used for the individual and Maya for the cosmic, but they mean the same thing. So avidyatvam. What is the lakshanam? What is the defining feature of Maya, of ignorance? The defining feature of it is that it's unintelligible, it's inscrutable. Avidya. So this avidyatvam, the fact that we can't understand it, is the defining feature of Maya itself. Why? Prakriti param. It's beyond anything that we can see or understand, even beyond the mind or all of that. So this is, otherwise it says that it would be something real. Now it says it can't bear the light of any pramana. This is also another interesting thing. This pramana, this is a standard of truth. How do we know that something is true? So suppose we're in our room and we hear a noise outside and we think, okay, a thief has come. So we walk outside and we look around and we don't see any thief. Pratyaksha. Okay? Then we look around. Are there footprints? Huh? If we see footprints, then we can assume, anumana, that the thief had come but is no longer there. We don't see any footprints. Then we see our neighbor sitting on the porch has visual access to our front lawn the whole time. We ask the neighbor, did you see anybody come? They say no. So then we assume that it was my imagination, that there was no thief at all. Because this assertion that I have that a thief came, it doesn't stand up to the light of any of these three proofs that we have. So they say when we analyze Maya that we can't find any real evidence that it actually exists as a real thing. So it's not a vastu, it's not a real thing. But we can't simply dismiss it because the whole universe is visible, everything, because of this Maya. This is the explanation that we give. So this is that state of affairs that it doesn't bear the light of truth. So there's another nice saying that trying to shine the light of truth on Maya, to understand what it really is like trying to examine the darkness by shining a light on it. It disappears. So we say, well, then what do? We'll examine it without the light on. Then we can't see it. Huh? So these are the two options we try to understand through the human mind, through time, space, and causation, which is also Maya. Then we're in the dark. We're groping in the dark. When we shine the light on it, it simply disappears. So this is what we're dealing with, this phenomenon of Maya. So it's a phenomenon. We can't say it's real. We can't say it's unreal. In fact, this is another definition we have. Sadasad vilakshana. It can't be, it doesn't have the characteristic of being real. It doesn't have the characteristic of being unreal. It's not real because it can disappear, like the darkness. But we see the effects of it, so we can't say that it's completely unreal, that it's just our imagination. It's something. It's some type of, so we say some type of phenomenon. And we need this concept to explain how this infinite absolute Brahman somehow turns into a creator, what we call God, and how this universe comes into existence. So it has a very important role to play, but it's so hazy and fuzzy. And if we start asking why, how it works and why it works and things like that, then we get ourselves into a whole lot of trouble. So Sri Ramakrishna says that there's a reason for this, that this human mind cannot grasp certain types of ideas that are beyond the realm of the mind. And he gives the example that if we have a pot that will hold 1 gallon of milk, he said you're trying to pour 5 gallons of milk into a 1 gallon pot, when we try to understand these things. So then we think, well, what if the mind, we can expand the mind so that it's big enough to hold 5 gallons? It'll never become big enough. It'll never be big enough. It's something inherent about this concept of Maya that makes it inscrutable. The very nature of it, it's inscrutable. So it's like saying that if only I could learn to run faster, I could outrun my shadow. Huh? Or if I could spin around faster, I could see the back of my head. Huh? Impossible. There's something inherently impossible about it. If I can really build up my muscles, I can lift myself off the ground. Huh? We can't do any of these things. So this is this concept of Maya that will understand the role that it plays, but we can't understand what it is or why it's there or how it comes into being, anything like that. Another verse, very nice verse. Achintya kuluye bhava datang stardkena yojayet. I'll just read this first line. It's very, very often cited, this one line. Achintya, again, those things which are beyond the possibility of the mind to fathom. Achintya. Those things. Natang tarkena yojayat. Don't try to apply logic and reason to these things. It won't help. Huh? Now, this is what we're trying to do now. I'm trying to apply some logic and reason to this, but it's not going to reach it. It's not going to get it, but it'll put things in perspective at least. It should serve some type of purpose. So, the human mind wants to get answers to these things. A very curious thing about this human mind, we can't seem to accept the fact that there's not an answer to a valid question. Somebody says, how did this universe come to existence? We say, well, I don't know, but it had to have happened one way or the other. One way or the other, it had to happen. So we have these different theories. We know that one thing follows after another, cause and effect. So we have this children's riddle. What came first, the chicken or the egg? So we have our options. We can say, well, there had to be a chicken first. That has to be the beginning of it. And then the egg comes, and then we get the whole series. And then somebody says, well, where did that chicken come from? We say, I don't know. It's just, there had to be a chicken. And the other person said, no, there had to be an egg first. Where did the egg come from? There had to be one egg that didn't come from a chicken. This is the kind of answer that we give. Or we say that there was always a previous egg and a previous chicken. Now, this is the answer, unfortunately, that most of the time we accept. And it's a little bit illogical. We say things happen from beginningless time. This cycle of creation has been taking place from beginningless time. The logician will say, no, this is a fallacy, infinite regress. You can't say that. Swamiji gives one nice example. Suppose we look out the window and we see a big branch from a tree. And that's all that we can see. And we can imagine that on one side, it can grow without any limit. Theoretically, it can keep getting longer and longer and longer. But we can't say that it can do it on both sides. The other side has to be attached to the trunk of the tree. So there can't be a beginningless series of things. This is something that's more or less impossible. And yet, this is the mind, we simply stop and say, okay, beginningless series. So that makes a little bit of sense. Then these Advaitans come along, very, very clever people. They say, no, if these three things are wrong, then it can't be real to begin with. Ajata. There was never any real tree to begin with, never any tree limb or anything like that. It's all imaginary. The mind doesn't really like this answer very much. Picture one of these murder mysteries. The Agatha Christie, the murder on the Orient Express. So they find a body. There's been a murder, and there are several different people who have a motive. They have a motive, but they have a good alibi also. Now, we read this and we see that it can't be this one or this one or this one. They all have a good alibi, but we know it had to be one of them because there's a dead body. There had to be one of them. Now, this Advaitavadan will say, no, you're thinking it's a historical novel. It's just a novel. And perhaps the author hasn't even come up with an end to it. There doesn't have to be any murderer until the author declares rights in a murderer. It's not real. So we say like a dream. Suppose we have a dream that we're in a beautiful house. There's beautiful furniture and everything. And we wake up from the dream and somebody says, oh, really? Beautiful tables and chairs? Who made them? I go, what do you mean? That wasn't part of my dream. No, you can't have a table and a chair unless somebody made it. This is logic, right? Said, but no, it's not real. It's a dream. If you want to say who made it, I made it. I'm the one who projected the dream. Until I dream that there was somebody who made it, then nobody made it. This is also not very satisfying. But this is one way of looking at the whole thing, that everything is unreal like a dream. So they say that don't ask how the rope became a snake. Discover that there never was a snake, it was always a rope, then don't ask that question. Now the problem is that if we say this all projected as a dream, then we say, well, how does this Brahman end up dreaming something? Then again, we're stuck, Maya. So we can't get rid of it. Even if we say this is unreal like a dream, which, by the way, Thakur never says, not in that sense anyhow, then even then we need something. So everybody needs something philosophically to explain. Even the dualists, they have to say that this infinite absolute Brahman has some power of creation. There has to be something added to it. And this is where this Maya comes in different forms. Sometimes it's a creative power, sometimes it's even nature itself, sometimes it's its power of illusion to project this kind of dream that we see. So this is the necessity of this idea of Maya. When we put a word to something, we sometimes think that we've understood it. This is a very curious phenomenon. I've been thinking about this also recently. Suppose a small child sees a beautiful butterfly and says, "Where does the butterfly come from?" So the mother says that it's actually a caterpillar turned itself into a butterfly. So the child says, "How does the caterpillar turn itself into a butterfly?" So what does the mother say? By the process of metamorphosis. Now, then we say, okay, now I understand. Do we understand? Has it told us anything? So then the child says that, I see the colder it gets, that the water in the pond gets colder and colder, but why at 32 degrees does it turn into ice? So what does the father say? That's the freezing point of water. Huh? So we say, okay, so that's the freezing point of water. So then we think that we've understood something. Then we see plants. They have to be in the sun in order to grow properly. So we say, well, why is that? And the mother says that they can somehow convert the sunlight into nutrition for them. And we say that, well, how does it do it? We say, by the process of photosynthesis. So we say, well, what is the process of photosynthesis? What is that? That's the process by which they can convert sunlight into nutrition. We say, oh, okay, now I understand. So this is what we do. How does this Brahman turn itself into this helpless creature that can't do anything, into this creator of the whole universe? Through Maya. Then we say, oh, okay, now I understand. But what do we understand? We understand that it's something inscrutable, that it's something beyond the capacity of the mind to understand. So we get a little comfort when we put these technical terms to things. Now, the scientists will understand, of course, there's the metamorphosis and freezing point and all of that better than us. They'll also reach a point where they simply have to say, well, we don't really know why. But we observe this phenomenon, we give a name to it. So this is what the philosophers have done to a large extent. Those who have had this direct realization, they don't bother with philosophy. They're beyond that. There's a nice conversation in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I don't remember who it was. Mahima Chakrabarti or somebody. He says those who wrote these philosophical texts, they weren't the ones who had this realization. Of course, we don't feel that. We feel that Shankaracharya and others, that they were realized souls, but still, there'll be great God-realized souls like Sri Ramakrishna who will argue from the other side. You can't understand these things. Don't worry about them. Don't try to think about them. We think that if we could expand ourselves to the size of a container of Sri Ramakrishna, so he was a huge container. Could he hold that amount of milk? Even he said, who can understand the ways of God? It's beyond our capacity to do it. So it's something that, there's something inherently impossible about it, because this mind functions within certain limits, time, space, and causation, and we're talking about absolute things. They go beyond all of that. So this is why Sri Ramakrishna used to tell M, especially, he used to say, Vichar Korona, don't reason these things about these things. Don't try to figure these things out with your mind. That it's impossible. Now the Vichara, this type of reasoning, it doesn't mean that Thakur didn't want us to think about things. Just these achintya things, these things that are beyond the realm of our understanding. Other things, he said, you constantly reason. What is important in life? What is not important? What is permanent? What is transitory? These things, he said, we have to be very careful and analyze, throughout our whole lifetime, analyze about these things. But these other things that are fruitless, the sooner we understand that we've bumped into this wall of logic and we can't go beyond it, and then we give it up, then the better off we are. So many times people will ask, well, how is it that this universe comes into being? How is it that God projects this universe? We give all sorts of answers. The best answer is we don't know. There are different theories, different ways of looking at it. Choose one that appeals to you, or else accept the fact that it's impossible to know. Or else simply say, through Maya, and then a smile, and then we comfort ourselves that now we understand something. But we don't really understand too much. We're getting a better picture of the whole thing. But as I say, it's very hard to convince the mind that nobody was the murderer, or that it's impossible to find out who the murderer was. We're so convinced that there had to be one. But somehow this kind of defies all of that, because all of the culprits, all of the possible murderers have an ironclad alibi with this. We can't really point to one that, yes, this is the one logical answer. So most religions simply say God created the universe. And how can God do it? God is God. God can do anything. This may be the most sensible thing. Because otherwise, if we get into all this stuff about cosmic illusion and everything, it becomes very sticky. We don't really know how far to go with all of that. This is why the snake and rope example, I always forget about thinking about the objects, that I'm looking at a chair because I don't know that I'm really looking at Brahman. It's very hard to wrap the mind around that. I'm looking within, and I see this body, mind, ego, and everything. That's the snake. And the fact that the real self is the Brahman itself, pure consciousness, that can be realized directly. And seeing everything else as pure consciousness, that's for the God-realized soul, for the mystic, to have that type of experience is beyond our ability to really comprehend things like that. So let me go back to this idea of why there's a very valid reason for this concept of Maya. So we start out with this idea, the Advaitan, that Brahman is nirguna. So no attributes, that means no Shakti, no power. And niriha, that actionless. So we just have this pure consciousness. And we have to try to explain how this pure consciousness Brahman can somehow become Ishvara, can somehow be responsible for the projection and sustenance and withdrawal of this whole universe. So we have to come up with a second category that can't be a second category, because Advaita, there has to be this oneness. So they come up with ideas that the Maya, it belongs to Brahman but doesn't belong to Brahman, but doesn't affect Brahman. So like the poison, the venom in the snake, that it's within the snake, but the snake is not poisoned by its own poison. There's a little protective sac. So we get examples like that. This kind of allows us to maintain the integrity of Brahman. The Advaitins are very interested in maintaining the integrity of Brahman that is not tainted by anything, even by any Shakti, anything like that. So we have this idea that if we talk about Maya as belonging to Brahman, that we can say that ultimately it's not real, so we don't have to worry where it came from or anything like that. It'll disappear, like the darkness will disappear. So we have this dilemma that we start out with this very pure, beautiful idea of Brahman, the pure consciousness and everything, and then we have this messy world to explain. And we start out with this idea that we're perfect and pure and one with the Brahman, and yet we feel so limited and small and subject to all types of problems and worries and anxieties and everything. So how do we explain all of this? So again, they say Maya. This is also Maya. So we have two basic dilemmas. Let me start with this, or explain it in a little different way. that two basic truths and two basic facts, and they come in perfect conflict with each other. We say the truth is that Brahman alone is real. Brahman alone is the only existence. Everything is reducible to that, but somehow the Brahman is unchangeable. We start out with that as a fact. Now, for us, as the basic truth, but the fact of our existence is that the Brahman is a very hazy idea. We don't see it, and we don't experience it. It's a kind of an abstract idea. We have some little glimpse of it as the self, because we know what consciousness is. But this physical universe is so real. Then, second truth is that I am that Brahman. But the fact of my existence is that I'm completely identified with the body, mind, and senses. And more than that, I'm identified with my culture, with my background, with my country, with my religion, with my possessions, with my accomplishments, with all sorts of things. So these things clash with each other. And so this is why Swamiji says that this is just a fact. We accept this fact. This is the human condition. And we understand that somehow we're in this state of ignorance with regard to our true nature. So this is if not an explanation of why and how Maya works, but at least the effect of it somehow. Why is it that we're born, if we're already perfect and already one with Brahman, why don't we know it? Now, they give the explanation. Katha Upanishad gives a nice explanation that mind goes outward and automatically we identify with the external things. But why does it work that way? These are unusual questions, I know, but this is the way the philosopher thinks and tries to explain things, and we throw up our hands and say Maya. Now, this whole concept of Maya underwent lots of changes. There's a historical way of looking at this also. The very earliest understanding comes from the early Vedic period. And I think that this is the best explanation. Maya here is some type of magic. Now, what is magic? Something that somebody can do without being able to explain it. There's no ordinary explanation. It's something magical. So this is the way it starts in the beginning. We get to the Upanishadic period, and this Maya is not there. Now, the very curious thing, because the Shankaracharya and the other Vedantins and Advaitans, they spend so much time with this idea of Maya that it's so critical to the understanding of Vedanta. But it's not there until we get to some of the very late Upanishads, until we get to Shvetashvatara Upanishad is the first that we find this concept of Maya, and it's much later than any of the others. So somehow they managed to get through all of this idea of this universe without bothering too much. Upanishads, I think, should be read partly as poetry. That what's the explanation for the universe? And Brahman got bored, looked around, nobody was there, and said, Bahusyama maya become many, and then started to project everything. It's beautiful poetry, but there's no real attempt to explain by Maya or anything like that. Then we get it later, and this Maya, it becomes a little bit more like this Shakti and this power that belongs to Brahman and starts to become identified with nature itself, Prakriti. In that verse that I chanted in the beginning, when Sri Krishna, from Gita, of course, from Sri Krishna says that this Maya of mine is difficult to transcend. Gunamayi, this Maya composed of the three gunas. So even there, by the time you get to the Gita, it's not just this ignorance. It becomes some type of power, something connected with nature. And when we get to the Shaktas and Sri Ramakrishna, he says, then let's not just talk about this Ishwar and everything. Now let's talk about the Divine Mother, because this main power is the power of creation. This belongs to the feminine side of things. So it'll keep evolving until we get to that point where we have this idea of not just Maya, Mahamaya, the Divine Mother. So the Shaktas, they'll say that, yes, we accept this idea of Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, but also Saguna Brahman. They're both real. Thakur said this over and over again. God is both with form and without form,
with attributes, without attributes, both are true. And they'll say, why not accept that as a very nice thing? If we picture a king, but there's no kingdom and there's no power to rule over it, what kind of king is he? Now, Shankaracharya himself uses that logic, but for the Advaitins, there's the Maya helping us to project this universe and everything. There's a little bit of this ignorance and delusion and everything. For the Shakta, no, this is the Aishwarya. This is the glory of the Divine Mother, that she can create this entire universe. How does it get so messed up? We've done it ourselves. Don't blame Mother for all of that. But in the beginning, at least, they'll say that everything is just the manifestation of Shakti, of the Divine Mother. So if we take the example of the sun, because the Advaitins like this example, that Brahman is like the sun. No, everybody likes it. Because the sun is self-luminous. It doesn't require a second light. It's its own light, and it illumines everything else. And it's pure, and it has no color to it. It's invisible. We can't see the light of the sun. We see things by the light of the sun. So it's nirguna. So everything seems to work perfectly well. And then the Shaktas will come along and say that you're looking at the nirguna aspect, but don't you know that sunlight has other aspects to it? And they'll say, if you take a prism and the sunlight passes through that prism, on the other side, all the colors of the rainbow. Now, the Advaitin will say, yeah, we understand that. That's Maya. And then we're seeing things that aren't really real. And then the Shakti will say, what do you mean not really real? This Maya belongs to Mother, and this how beautiful are all the different colors of the rainbow. So their position is not that different. There's an attitude towards it. Do we look upon it as something positive or as something deluding and delusive and illusory and everything? So they'll take this other side to it, that this is the glory of Mother, that she can create this entire universe. See, if we start in a lot of Vedantic philosophy and Indian philosophy in general, we have the male principle and the female principle. The male principle is usually this inactive, pure consciousness, because the role that the man has in creation is very secondary to the role that the woman has. So the woman is the one who is responsible. She's Mother Earth, Father Time and Mother Earth, or Mother Nature. Even this kind of distinction we have in so many different cultures. So the mother aspect is both saguna and nirguna. This is something that I heard so many times, this example from Swami Swahananda. I think it's the best possible example, that we think of the Divine Mother. She has a woman aspect. She's a woman. When she gives birth to a child, she becomes a mother. But still 100% woman. The nirguna, the original part, is always there. That's never not there. But the motherhood depends upon the creation, the child. So this Brahman is always Brahman. Even when this creation is there, and we call that Brahman Ishvara, it still remains the Brahman aspect. So the nirguna aspect is always there. Saguna aspect is also there. So they'll say, yes, so the sun, it has so many other qualities to it. After this universe is created, then it gives warmth, and it gives light, and it gives life to everything. So this is all that larger picture that we get of the Divine Mother. And this Maya becomes Shakti. It becomes a power. And they'll say to the Advaitin, don't be too particular. Why can't Brahman have a quality to it? Why does it have to be nirguna? It's just accept it. We think about who wants a concept of God that can't do anything. We say God has the power of creation. Of course, why not? How else do we explain anything? The scientist has no better explanation for anything. That we go from a black hole to all of this, but where did all of that come from? There's still that ultimate basic question. The one great scientist who understood this perfectly was Einstein. I don't remember the quote, but something like that even if we understand everything about how this phenomenal universe comes into existence, we still won't have the faintest idea of what's behind and everything, what the ultimate cause is. This is why where philosophy stops, religion begins. This type of idea. So this was the attitude that Sri Ramakrishna liked. I'm not going to say this was his position because he liked all these different ideas. But this is what he liked, to look upon God as mother. And this is something that was developed and became such a strong, beautiful tradition. And we heard that beautiful song of Kamalakanta. And it's based on this acceptance of the fact that there are questions without answers. What do we find in that song, Mother? That before this universe existed, where did you get your garland of skulls? Huh? Now, it's a perfectly silly question, but this is a way of saying that there'll be things about you, Mother, that we won't ever understand. And Thakur would say, I have no need to understand. I only need to know I have a mother, and that please give me shelter, and this is all I want. Give me pure devotion. Thakur himself said that, Mother, please destroy this tendency to analyze things with your thunderbolt. He said, I don't know, I don't care to know. Now, that doesn't mean that we bury our heads in the sand. It's enough if we understand the impossibility of knowing certain things. Once we know that, we're safe. Then we say, okay, I'm not going to keep bumping my head against the wall. I'm not going to keep asking these questions. I know that there are no good answers to them. That I come up with answers that may appeal to me and I may like a little bit, and that's okay. But otherwise, I know that I have to live with the fact that this is a very mysterious universe that we live in. We don't know the why and the how of it. And most sensible people, I think, will accept that. But the mind doesn't like to. We like to say, no, God did it. There's a reason behind everything, no accidents, all of these things. Maybe, but this is now we're getting to the realm of faith. That's all, not this realm of reasoning. This is something beyond reasoning. Okay, enough with this cosmic aspect. I want to talk a little bit about how this Maya works with regard to us, this individual level. This is avidya, because this is something irrefutable. This is something we all feel, we all know, that somehow our understanding of ourselves is wrong, is limited, that we're seeing ourselves as individual creatures with all of these peculiarities and limitations, and as a result, fears and anxieties and desires. And what is the reason for that? Now we say Maya, but here we can say ignorance. And what is that? We don't know who we are. So now we get on very safe ground, I think, that we can really talk about this false identification. That first of all, this what they call avarana Shakti takes over, and that we fail to see the real nature of the self, and the vikshepa Shakti, that we superimpose on that some false idea of who we are. And as I said before, it's not just the body, mind, and the senses, but our whole history, our personality, anything that we identify with, our profession, our possessions, everything. This all becomes who we think we are. This is our ego sense. Now we start to understand that this ego itself is Maya. That this false understanding of who we are, that this itself is a type of Maya. So Thakur used to say that. He would talk about this ego as Maya. He would talk about time as Maya. This is another very interesting thing. But this ego, he gave this example. It's like a stick lying on the surface of the water, giving the impression that one side is separate from the other side. Now, this stick is just on the surface. It can't separate one side from the other. There's only one body of water. It gives the appearance, and it can be removed. So this is why we say that this Maya is not something absolutely real, because it can be eliminated. It can be eliminated when this lower ego ripens into this higher ego. And then we lose that false identification with all of these changing, the superficial aspects of ourselves. Then we have this idea that the Sad and Asad will be this real and the unreal. Sri Ramakrishna says, let's take this idea of unreal, vidya, and substitute this idea of impermanent. Now, this impermanence, this again will go back to the ego. We talk about what is the nature of this world, that it's constantly changing. Now, my understanding is that this feeling of Maya, this feeling of the transitory nature of things, is not based on the transitory nature of external objects. We always say that. We say that these tables and these chairs, that they won't last forever. Now, suppose that things lasted forever. Just imagine that this room that we're in, that it's never going to change. It's always going to be like this. Does that mean there's this transitory nature of the world? No, I'm the one who's transitory. I'm the one who's going to leave it behind. This mind is constantly changing. Whether these things are real or unreal or last forever or don't last, that's secondary. That it's really this ego that accounts for this feeling of the transitory nature of things. Because the ego is identified with the mind, and the mind is constantly changing. So this is that sense that we have of this illusory nature of things, because, not that things are an illusion, but because through time and everything, we see everything just flowing into the past. Everything disappearing. Day after day, we say, where did it go? That's the transitory nature of things. Not the things themselves, but time is swallowing everything up. And this is Maya. This is one of the ideas that we have of Maya. We have that beautiful story of Narada. Narada and Krishna are walking one day down the road, and Krishna says, I'm feeling thirsty, go get me some water. So he goes to this nearby village, and he knocks on the door, do you have some water? And there's a beautiful young girl there. And Narada falls in love with her. So he the day after he keeps going back, he sees the father, and he says, I've fallen in love with your daughter. Will you please allow me to marry her? And yes, you can marry her. And they have one child and another, and different children. Then one day there's a heavy rain. Everything gets flooded. And they have to leave the house, and the rivers overflow. And one child is around his neck and holding one, and his wife. And the current pulls one away, and the wife is gone, and then the child. And then the last one, they all drown. And Narada himself goes underwater, and then he's unconscious. And there's a panning like that. And after a while, he wakes up. And Sri Krishna is looking at him. And he says, Narada, what happened to you? I sent you out for a glass of water a half hour ago. And you just came back without it. What happened? So Narada said, 12 years of my life went by like that, and you're saying it was a half hour. So many things happened. So this is how Maya works in our individual lives. That a lifetime is a long thing, but when we see it in the rearview mirror, it just went like that. All of the memories, all the accomplishments, hopes and dreams, they end up in the dustbin of time. We have nice memories of them, but where did they go? So there's a very keen feeling of Maya with regard to this transitory nature of the world. And this is why I think Sri Ramakrishna is always emphasizing this. It's not that these objects will come and go, but because of time, the nature of time and everything, that everything has a dreamlike quality to it. We look back and think of ourselves as small children. Are we really that same person? How did that happen? We look in the mirror and say, who is this old man looking back at me? How did that happen? Just yesterday, playing with friends in school and everything, and it just somehow went like that. So, this is what they say, this is Maya. Now, last little bit here. What do we do about it? How do we overcome this Maya? Now, Sri Ramakrishna gives us a couple of nice examples and different options that we can do. That one thing for this individual Maya. Forget about this cosmic thing. We've decided we can't figure that one out. It's too tough. But what do we do about this false identification? He says, well, you analyze this ego sense, this false ego. He said, if you look for it, you'll see that it has no substance to it. So you won't be able to find it even. So we say, very good. And he says, but the other side of the story is, the second you turn your back, it's right there again. So it's like the thief. There's a nice story about this, and there's an example from Sartre. He likes all of this ego stuff. He says, like the thief, after a big heist, he goes into the tavern and he's bragging about his exploits, about the jewelry he stole and everything. And then somebody says, the police are coming. So he quickly runs out the back door and hides in back. So the police are there, they don't find him. Then the police leave, he comes right back in and starts bragging again. So this is that ego. We look for it, when we try to shine the light on it, it disappears. But then it comes back. So Thakur says that accept the fact that this ego is there, and he says, let this rascal ego remain as a servant of God, or the child of God, form some type of relationship. And through that, we'll break the other type of attachment. If I'm the child of the Divine Mother, then I don't think of myself in terms of this physical body. Physically, I'm the child of my biological parents. Child of the Divine Mother, that means I'm thinking of myself as spirit. Or we take the point of view of the Jnani, that I'm just the witness of everything. When as soon as the mind identifies with his physical body and personality, then I remind myself, I'm just the witness of everything. So these are two ways of doing it. Then there's a third way, that we throw up our hands and say, I give up. Mother, it's up to you. I tried my best. Now I simply take refuge with you. I take shelter with you. If you want to remove this Maya from me, then please do it. I'm your child. I don't know anything else. You look after me. This is also the view of many of these beautiful Shakti poets, the Ram Prasad and Kamalakanta and everything. And also Thakur like that. They say, Mother, I don't care to know any of these things. That as you make me do, I'll do. So that this will be enough for me. We read in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. The Jnani, the follower of the path of knowledge, rejects Maya. The Bhakta devotee, however, does not ignore Maya. He worships Mahamaya. Taking refuge in her, he says, O Mother, please stand aside from my path. Only if you step out of the way shall I have the knowledge of Brahman. The Jnani explains away all three states, waking, dream, and deep sleep. But the Bhakta accepts them all. As long as there is the ego, everything else exists. So long as the I exists, the Bhakta sees that it is God who has become Maya, the universe, the living beings, and the 24 cosmic principles. Then again he says, one must propitiate the Divine Mother, the primal energy, in order to obtain God's grace. This is the second half of that verse. Mameviye pravadyante, that those who take refuge in me, then I help them cross over that Maya. So God himself is Mahamaya, who deludes the world with her delusion and conjures up the magic of creation, preservation, and destruction. She has spread the veil of ignorance before our eyes. We can go into the inner chamber only when she lets us pass through the door. So what happens when we transcend this Maya? Does the universe disappear? It becomes transformed in our eyes. It's not that it disappears. The Thakur says, what happens when the clerk gets sent to jail and he's released from jail? Does he go about dancing in the streets? No, he's clerk again. So we're right back in the world, but we don't see it the same way. It's completely the power that it has to hold us and to control us and to attract us and everything, that's all gone. And we see this Divine Mother dwelling within everything. So these are, either we see the Divine Mother dwelling in everything, or everything is dreamlike. This is the Jnani. See, Thakur says, after realization, we have two different types, two different archetypes. The Bhakta sees everything as the Divine Mother, or everything is manifestation of God, the glory of God. But the Jnani sees everything as hazy and dreamlike. There's a very beautiful letter, my favorite letter actually, that Swamiji wrote to Josephine MacLeod, where we get a little glimpse of that state of beyond Maya, that state beyond Maya. And Swamiji, in the mood of the Jnani, he was also a great devotee and everything, but here is the mood of the Jnani. So I want to read from this letter. I'm drifting again, with the bright, warm sun ahead and masses of vegetation around. And in the heat, everything is so still, so calm. And I'm drifting languidly in the warm heart of the river. I dare not make a splash with my hands or feet, for fear of breaking the wonderful stillness that makes you feel sure it is an illusion. Oh, it is so calm. My thoughts seem to come from a great, great distance in the interior of my own heart. They seem like faint, distant whispers, and peace is upon everything. Sweet, sweet peace, like that one feels for a few moments just before falling into sleep, when things are seen and felt like shadows, without fear, without love, without emotion. Peace that one feels alone, surrounded with statues and pictures. The world is, but not beautiful or ugly, but as sensations without exciting any emotions. Oh, the blessedness of it. Everything is good. Om, that existence. Everything is good and beautiful, for things are losing their relative proportion to me, my body among the first. Then he says, Om, that existence. So even those who transcend this Maya, there'll be different types and different ways of experiencing it. But for Sri Ramakrishna, everything depends on getting rid of this ego, because this is the one block. And we have these different ways of doing it. This is that path of surrender, ultimately, and this transformation of the ego. That this will help us get beyond all of this. It won't help us understand these big cosmic questions. Those are question marks. But we won't care about those things then. They'll lose their significance. And right now, it's a big curiosity thing for us. But for those who realize everything, Thakur, he never tried to explain these things. He would say, Lila, this is just this divine play. That would be enough for us to understand it. Okay, I want to close by just reading another song by Kamalakanta. We generally we connect Ram Prasad mostly, but Kamalakanta was an equally great poet and songwriter. His songs are really beautiful. And this particular song is the one that Swamiji sang the last day of his life. When early morning he woke up and went into the shrine, Belur Math and locked the door. Very unusual. So he was there all by himself for several hours. When he came out, they said they heard him singing this song. Don't get nervous, I'm not going to sing for you. But this translation is the one that I'm used to. It's not a very literal translation, but it's a very beautiful translation. So I'll close by reading this song of Kamalakanta. And it gives a very beautiful picture of how the devotee of the Divine Mother accepts the fact that the world is too much for us to understand. And we just have to rely on Mother, that's all. Is Kali, my mother, really black? The naked one, though black she seems, lights the lotus of the heart. Men call her black, but yet my mind will not believe that she is so. Now she is white, now red, now blue. Now she appears as yellow, too. I hardly know who Mother is, though I've pondered all my life. Now Purusha, now Prakriti, and now the void she seems to be. To meditate on all these things confounds poor Kamalakanta's wits. So this is the view of the worshippers of the Divine Mother. This Mahamaya, the great Enchantress. We accept it. There's something mysterious about this universe, and there's a way for us to transcend it, not to understand it, but to go beyond this Maya and to reach that state of blessedness where we feel our freedom and we feel that we lie in the lap of Mother. So a very beautiful way of dealing with this tough philosophical question of, of how we connect this Brahman with everything else. So next week, Swami Chidbrahman, he will be speaking. It'll be remote, so we won't have any lecture here. And the following week, we have our Puja for Sri Ramakrishna's birthday. But before that, on March 1st, we have Shivratri. That'll start at 7:30. We'll send a notice for all of this, of course. And then on March 6th, we have our Puja here at 11 in the morning. Okay, so thank you all for coming. I'll close with the chant. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinas Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pasyantu Ma Kashti Dukha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. May all beings be happy. May all be free from disease. May all realize only good things in life. May no one suffer from misery. Om peace, peace, peace be unto all.